It's the 2022 World Cup. It's the squad update for Argentina. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin, and today we'll be updating Argentina's squad for the 2022 World Cup. So we have done a mediacast on the groups, which took a close look at Argentina's team, as well as a player mediacast, which went through each of the candidates for making the final squad. There are also short versions of those. And the player edition ended with a prediction of the starters, and we'll do the same thing here at the end. This mediacast, though, is an addendum to that. In other words, we won't be repeating all of that, but we will be summarizing the key information and then adding on to it. So it's not necessary to listen to that version, but you should know that the conclusions we draw here are both based on that information and explained in more detail there. So we recommend the full player podcast, but if we have time, we're hoping to release a player version focused solely on the final squad, giving the bios of just those 26 players who made the team. Okay, well, the final squad has been released, and today we'll find out how accurate we were in our predictions. We're going to list the names of the candidates and then announce who made the preliminary and then the final squad. So as we guessed, most squads had a few surprises for us, players who didn't make it and new or unexpected players who did. So we'll go over those players and summarize them at the end, just to kind of review them. So we'll also discuss whether the selections and the games played since June 2022 have changed our thoughts on our predicted starters and on the team's prospects. So here we go. I am proud to say I actually have an appropriate shirt for this one. So my Argentina shirt, the right colors for this one, and also the right shirt. Okay, well, we're beginning with formations, and really we're focused on the recent games. There were 2 September friendlies and a November game on November 16th. But we're going to kind of review their formations since the Copa America there, and then I will tell you what happened in those recent games. So generally, no, let me cover the games first. The first one was in USA. Actually, the first 2 September games were both in USA. First one against Honduras and the second one against Jamaica. Both of them with 3-0 wins there. And finally, in November 16th, they went to UAE, so maybe to kind of acclimatize themselves to that area, and played against the UAE, so playing away there in UAE, and it was a 6-0 win, so pretty convincing. In terms of formations, well, we'll look at the formations over time so that we'll have something to compare them with. So actually, Argentina's pretty steady in its formation selection. Basically, there's 3 that they alternate from. All 3 of them were in the Copa America, as well as in World Cup qualifying and in the friendlies too. So a 4-3-3 formation, that's actually what they started Copa America with, and 4 of the 7 games with that formation. A 4-2-3-1 formation, 2 of the games in Copa America were that. And in the final, it was a 4-4-2 formation. So roughly, that's also the frequency. So 4-3-3 is usually their most common formation. 4-2-1-3 slightly less used, and then 4-4-2 used least of all. When we get to the last 3 friendlies there, we see that they used a 4-3-3 twice and a 4-4-2. For game 4. So I'm sure we'll see something like that. The common element there being 4 defenders at the back. And so 2 central defenders and 2 wingers. They don't deviate from that. And usually there's just 1 line of midfielders in the 4-3-3 or the 4-4-2. And then, of course, anywhere from 1 to 3 forwards. at the top. So the other thing I want to point out is that all three of those recent friendlies were played by 18 players. So those are players who were likely starters for the Cup. So they weren't experimenting with new players a lot there. Okay, and maybe they were experimenting a bit with possible starters, because there are a few positions where there are we're not really sure who is going to be the starter. Okay, well, let's move on to talking about the squad. And we start with manager Lionel Scaloni. So again, we're not going to do the full bio here, but you can listen to the full-length podcast if you want that information. Lionel Scaloni has been with the national team of Argentina from 2018. He's been in charge. So we are going to consider him a successful candidate. He made the squad. In other words, he wasn't fired shortly before the Cup. Okay, let's move on to goalkeepers. And the way we're going to do this is to go through the candidates by name and then eliminate those who were not selected and tell you which ones were. And then we're going to finish the section with a little summary of the position. So I'm going to make the graphics a bit bigger here. For goalkeepers, we have a definite candidate in Emiliano Martinez and two likely candidates in Franco Armani and Juan Musso. I do have a note on Juan Musso. I'll get back to that. And we have a possible candidate in Geronimo Rulli, and then possible but unlikely candidate in Esteban Andrada, but he did not make the squad, so we'll eliminate him here. And then a player who seems to be off the squad, Agustin Marchizan. However, he did make the preliminary squad, which was a bit surprising to me. However, did not make the final cut to the final squad. Okay, and we'll go back to the story on Juan Musa, the injured candidate. Well, let me first just say who made the final squad. So Emiliano Martinez made the final cut. Franco Armani, the likely candidate, made the final cut. Juan Musso didn't. He made the preliminary squad, but not the final cut. And so Geronimo Rulli, our possible candidate, made the final cut there. So Juan Musso, a bit of a surprise because we had him as likely. But we did note in the previous podcast that he was out with a fractured jaw from late September. The truth is he overcame that quickly, even though he did undergo surgery, and he was back playing for his team by October 30th. And now I'm a bit unsure here to what degree his injury played a role, though, because the preliminary squad was named on October 22nd, kind of before he came back from injury. So perhaps the injury did play a role. However, the manager would have been aware of the situation and would have known that, might have known that he was going to make it back in time. Nevertheless, he was not selected. Rather, he was named to a reserve squad for the Cup, which I whenever I've seen teams use a reserve squad, it's kind of a sop that they throw to Cerebus there just to make them feel a bit better, like they have been selected, but they really haven't. So I'm going to just say Juan Musso wasn't selected there. But I suppose if one of these players gets injured, there's a slim chance of him coming back. So Emiliano Martinez, Franco Armani, Geronimo Rulli, the selections for goalie, and I'll summarize the position. Emiliano Martinez had played 7 of their 11 World Cup qualifying games, with several other keepers given a start. Armani played one of those, as well as their last June game. And Rulli started their first September friendly, which kind of suggested that the manager had him in mind even before Musa's injury. Anyway, it was Martinez for the last 2 of those friendlies. And so that gives a hint that Martinez is the starter, but we'll come back and discuss that at the end of the podcast. We won't predict starters here. Let's move on to central defence, and the candidates were Nicholas Otamendi as a definite candidate, Lisandro Martinez as a likely candidate, along with German Pazzelli. And for possible candidates, we had Christian Romero and Lucas Martinez Quarta and Marco Senesi. And then a player who seemed to be off the squad, Facundo Medina. So we can quickly eliminate Facundo Medina. He did not make the squad. Let's look at who made the squad then. And we have Nicholas Otamendi, our definite candidate, selected for the World Cup. And Lisandro Martinez, also selected. Jermaine Pezzella, selected. And Lucas Martinez Quarta was selected for the preliminary squad, but didn't make the cut to the final squad. And Christian Romero was selected, although there is a comment on him, but we'll just finish going through the candidate. Marco Senesi also selected for the preliminary squad, but not making the final squad. So just let me tell you how many of the players were selected for the preliminary squad. So it was a 48-man preliminary squad, and the final squad is 26 men. So we're going to see 22 players eliminated here. That's almost half of them. And in fact, the team was cut from 48 to 28, and then over a few days to 27 to 26. So they were waiting to kind of see if certain players were looking like they were going to be fit to play. I'll talk about that a bit more when we get to those players. Okay, so Martinez Quarta and Senesi not making the final squad. That leaves us with Nicholas Otamendi, Lisandro Martinez, German Pazzelli, and Christian Romero. So I'll summarize who's been starting or playing, starting in the position. Actually, there was a lot of rotation among these four players, Otamendi, Martinez, Pezzella, and Romero. Otamendi and Romero did enjoy kind of longer spells of starting, and Lisandro Martinez got the least amount of play. And actually, that continued into the recent friendlies, with all four of them starting the September game, so two of them one game and two of them the other. And in November, it was Otamendi and Lisandro Martinez. So we'll see what we make of that when we try to predict the starters at the end. Meanwhile, we'll move on to left backs here, and the candidates are Marcos Acuna. We didn't have a definite candidate, so he was a likely candidate, and Nicholas Tagliafico, also a likely candidate. And that's all we had in this position, and both of them made the squad, the final cut. So Marcos Acuna and Nicholas Tagliafico going to the World Cup. In terms of the position, Acuna and Tagliafico alternated in the Copa America there, but Acuna played a little more in World Cup qualifying, or played more in World Cup qualifying, especially at the beginning. Tagliafico came in a bit more towards the end and played the 2 September friendlies, and Acuna played the November friendly. So again, we'll try to make sense of that when we predict the starters at the end. Moving on to right backs, we have a definite candidate in Nahuel Molina, a likely candidate in Gonzalo Montiel, and a possible candidate in Juan Foyth. And all of them, I kind of jumped ahead on the YouTube graphic there because I was highlighting them as I went, but that is what happened. All three of them were selected. So now we'll go to a summary of the position. Nahuel Molina started most games, but Montiel came in for 2 of the last 3, sowing a bit of doubt in our mind as to who the starter was going to be. Molina played the first September friendly, and Montiel played the second. And then to add a bit of confusion to the mix, just in the most recent November game, Juan Foyth was selected to play. So all three of them playing starting one of the last 3 games there. Okay, let's move on to the midfield, and we'll begin with central midfielders. Actually, yes, we did have Giovanni Lo Celso. He's coded as a central midfielder, but even in the main podcast, we moved him to a left midfielder because that organized things a little better for us. So here we have a definite candidate in Leandro Paredes and a likely candidate in Ezequiel Palacios and also Guido Rodriguez. Both likely candidates. We have Alexis McAllister as a possible candidate. And we have a possible but unlikely candidate, Nicolas Dominguez. And that was it for the squad. We did, in the previous podcast, have Leandro Paredes as an injury concern, and we'll update that here. Okay, let's go through who made it first. Leandro Paredes made it, and I'll talk about his injury here. Actually, it does seem a constant worry. We reported that he was out for the June games with an abductor muscle tear, and that had been going on from early April. And he had a couple of injuries previously in the season. However, he returned from that muscle injury in time to start the new season with his club, which I believe started in August. However, he also had a biceps femoral muscle injury in late October. However, he was recovered and playing by November 10th. So he's kind of consistently been a worry with an injury, but he does seem to have recovered in time for the Cup, and thus they selected him. Okay, Ezequiel Palacios, the likely candidate, was selected for the squad, as was Guido Rodriguez, so both likely candidates there. Alexis McAllister, the possible candidate, was selected. But the possible but unlikely candidate, Nicolas Dominguez, was selected only for the preliminary squad, which in itself was a surprise because we had him as possible but unlikely, but he was not selected for the final squad. Rather, we have a new candidate added to the list late on, and that was Enzo Fernandez. So Enzo Fernandez brought in at the end, and because he didn't come up in the previous podcast, we'll introduce him here. So he had never appeared for the national team, even on the bench, before being named to the squad for their September 2022 games. So no caps for Enzo Fernandez. He's just 21 years old and plays for Benfica in Portugal. He moved from River Plate in Argentina in 2022 to Benfica. So there we have it. Enzo Fernandez, I'm guessing that club affiliation, that move, and perhaps his form earned him a spot on the squad here. Okay, so 5 central midfielders there. Let's move on to the left midfield. And I said we had moved to Giovanni Lo Celso here. And that's because he is usually there playing as a left attacking midfielder or as a left winger. We did actually have him as a definite candidate, and the manager had called him irreplaceable, but I'm a bit curious about that because he only started 8 of their 13 games since the 2021 Copa America, so apparently was replaceable, the irreplaceable player. Anyway, injury came into it here. So a torn muscle injury picked up in early November. His return was or is now expected to be December 19th. But I'm guessing they didn't know that at the time, and they were waiting for the prognosis to see if it was possible he played in the Cup. So, I mean, the manager's irreplaceable suggests that he really wanted Giovanni Lo Celso on the squad. And so that's why he cut from 48 to 28 players. So one of the 2 players were Giovanni Lo Celso, kind of deciding if he was going to be fit. And I think if he had been fit, a different player would have been cut. Turns out, though, that his return date is November or December 19th, so he was cut from the squad due to his injury. So Giovanni Lo Celso not making the squad. Okay, over to the right midfield, and we have a definite candidate in Rodrigo de Paul. So Rodrigo de Paul did make the squad, so we'll mark him in green there. And yeah, he is coded as a right midfielder, but he does sometimes play a little further back in the central midfield, Rodrigo de Paul. And yes, I'm just going to, summarize the position of left and right midfielder. So we'll go back to the left side and talk about Lo Celso. It was mostly Lo Celso in this position, and the position is really used in that 4-3-3, which seems to be their favorite formation. So but Lo Celso only started, as I said, 8 of the 13 games, and a variety of others stepped into the position. However, no one more than twice, other than Lo Celso, of course. Lo Celso played both September friendlies in the position, and in the 4-4-2 of the November match, the position was not used. Okay, and then on the right midfield, again, same story. It's used when the formation is a 4-3-3, and De Paul is there when they use the position. Again, they use the position about half the time, so that's why De Paul has. Oh no, he has 12 of 13 starts. So when they don't use the position, he is used elsewhere in the midfield. In terms of the right midfield position, though, it was De Paul in one of the September friendlies and McAllister in the other. And as I said, the position was not used in the November game. Okay, we are ready to move on to left wingers, and here we have. Well, Angel Maria is coded as a left midfielder, which is doesn't suit our purposes because we consider a left midfielder a more defensive position. So he's more of an attacker, and he has played on the left side for long periods of his career. But recently he's, or during the period we're talking about, which is from the 2021 Gold Cup, he has been a right winger. Basically, no, not so much a right winger as a right attacking midfielder, sometimes even a right forward, actually. Anyway, we have moved him to the position of right winger because we're going to deal with right attacking forward there too. So we will defer talking about Angel Maria, and our next candidate here is Papu Gomez, or sometimes called Alejandro Gomez. And we have a possible candidate in Lucas Ocampos. And then he seems to be off the squad, Eduardo Salvio. And that proves right. He is off the squad. He was not selected. So we'll remove Eduardo Salvio from the list and go back to the top. So Papu Gomez, or Alejandro Gomez, was selected. Lucas Ocampos was selected for the preliminary squad, but didn't make the cut to the final squad. Okay, and let's summarize the position of left winger. So actually the winger position is rarely used, but these players may move into a left attacking midfielder or even a left forward role. So Papu Gomez played more centrally in the few games that he did start, and he also played as a left forward in one of the recent friendlies. And as we've noted, the position of right wing wasn't used in the last friendly. Oh, sorry, it was used in the last friendly. It's a 4-4-2. They don't often use it, but they used it in the last friendly. And it was not Papu Gomez who played it, but central midfielder McAllister, who seems to pop up all over the place. He played as the left winger there. Okay, let's move on to the right wing. We've now moved Angel Di Maria over here. And so he is the first candidate, a definite candidate. And so is Joaquin Correa. we had him as a definite candidate, and a possible but unlikely candidate was Emiliano Buendia. So those are the three candidates on the right wing, and Angel Di Maria did make the final squad, as did Joaquin Correa. So we were pretty good in identifying chances. Possible but unlikely candidate, Emiliano Buendia, did make the preliminary squad, but was not selected for the final squad. Okay, so that's right wingers, and let's talk about the position. As on the left, the right wing position is rarely used, but Angel Di Maria plays ever more regularly as a right attacking midfielder and sometimes as a right forward. So he played once as a right forward and once as a right winger in the recent friendlies, right winger in that November game there. So that is the situation on the right side. And now we move to the forward line, beginning with attacking midfielders. And generally, we have kind of central attacking midfielders in mind here because we've done the wingers and the right and left attacking midfielders. Okay, so here the candidates are Angel Correa. He was a likely candidate. And then we had Maximiliano Meza as a possible but unlikely candidate. Also Manuel Lanzini as possible but unlikely. So Manuel Lanzini was not selected even for the preliminary squad. Maximiliano Meza was selected for the preliminary squad, but did not make the final cut. And Angel Correa was another of the two players that they were kind of delaying a decision on. So they made the cut from 48 to 28 to 27. Lo Celso was number 28. Angel Correa was number 27. So the last player cut there. So basically on the preliminary squad, I believe he made that reserve squad, but honestly, I don't really pay attention to that because I don't think it means that much. Okay, and finally, we're going to look at, we should look at the position of attacking midfielders. So the position exists only in the 4-2-3-1, which, as we saw, they don't use very often. When they do use it, it is forward Messi or forward Dybala, or sometimes central midfielder McAllister, who appear as the central attacking midfielder. However, the position was not used in recent friendlies because if you think of a 4-3-3 and a 4-4-2, there's just one line of midfield, so no central attacking midfielder. Okay, so we have none of them made it. Forwards, we have lots. So, of course, the most famous name, Lionel Messi, is, he's designated as a forward, but actually plays in various positions in the upper side of the field, the attacking side. So Lionel Messi as a definite candidate, and Nicolas Gonzalez also as a definite candidate. We have Lautaro Martinez as a likely candidate. I know Argentina fans, you're saying like, what? But if you go back to the Full Play podcast, we explain why we put him as likely rather than definite. And we also have Julian Alvarez as a likely candidate. Possible candidate, Paulo Dybala. And possible but unlikely, we have three candidates, and we'll delete them as we go because none of them made it. No, I won't delete them as we go because that is not true. So Lucas Alario, Lucas Boye, and Giovanni Simeone, all possible but unlikely. And then we did in our podcast mention Sergio Aguero, who is now retired. So we delete him from the list. Let's go back to the top. And they brought a lot of these players, actually. No surprise, Lionel Messi was selected. Nicolas Gonzalez, the other definite candidate, too, was selected. The likely candidate, Lautaro Martinez, selected, Julian Alvarez also selected, and Paulo Dybala also selected, the possible candidate. And Lucas Alario was selected for the preliminary squad but didn't make the final cut. Same is true of Giovanni Simeone, selected for the preliminary squad but didn't make the final cut. Lucas Boy, on the other hand, was not selected even for the preliminary squad. So that leaves us with 5 forwards: Lionel Messi, Nicolas Gonzalez, Lautaro Martinez, Julian Alvarez, and Paulo Dybala. So let's talk about who's been playing where. And the outside forwards, if you think about the 4-3-3, the 2 forwards on the outside are generally Gonzalez on the left and Messi on the right. And then right winger Di Maria sometimes comes into either position, maybe on the left or on the right. Towards the end of the period we're talking about, which is the 2021 Gold Cup to June 2022, Julian Alvarez made inroads there. And the centre forward is usually Lautaro Martinez or Lionel Messi. And sometimes it can be both, because we saw that they do sometimes have 2 forwards lining up. So Lautaro Martinez started both of the September friendlies as a forward, and it was Julian Alvarez alongside Messi in the November game. Okay, so just for those of you who are still freaking out of Lautaro Martinez as a likely candidate, we do kind of put him a bit higher in terms of the likelihood of his starting. It's just given the number of games he played in the period we're talking about, we had a bit of a concern that lowered him from a definite candidate to a likely candidate. I also have a note on Paulo Dybala, an injury note. A hamstring injury in mid-October was a bit of a concern, but he was back playing on November 13th. So it looks like a slight worry for an injury that came to nothing, which Argentinians will be happy about. Okay, and a little later I'll talk about several candidates who made the preliminary squad. I'm just looking at the number 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There were 9 players who made the preliminary squad that we didn't talk about in the previous podcast because they hadn't been around by that point. So all of these players kind of appearing or else reappearing, meaning that they hadn't played in 2021 going forward. So I think there was one player who had played before that, but we will only kind of talk about the main players of those 9, those who are of interest. So you see that makes up 9 of the 22 players they cut in the preliminary squad. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the players section, the player-by-player section. So let's move on to some stats. We did do these similar stats for the team as a whole, but they were for the basically for all the players on the slate for Argentina, which is basically all players who had played since 2021. Now we've reduced it to just talking about these 26 players who reached the final squad. So the average age of those 26 is 27.9. So that is actually quite old. The average is 27.1. And there are a couple of teams who are slightly older, but obviously Argentina favoring veterans over youth there. So we'll break this down a bit by saying there are 5 players who are 33 or older, and only, 2 players who are 22 or younger. So we'll put a little graphic up for the YouTube people, and this is what it looks like. So we have Franco Armani at 36, the goalkeeper, Lionel Messi at 35, and Angel Di Maria, Nicolas Otamendi, and Papu Gomez all at 34. Actually, it takes a bit of a drop there down to 31 years old, and there are 5 more players who are in their 30s, 30 or 31. And then if we go down to the bottom of the graph, we see Alex McAllister at 23 years old, Julian Alvarez at 22-year-old. So they're pretty, becoming big names for the club, for the national team. And Enzo Fernandez, the one who has kind of brought in the only new candidate, 21 years old. So just those 3 who are below 23. So not much youth in the squad there, but I'm sure that's something they'll kind of have to address after this World Cup. Is a bit of renewal there. I wouldn't be surprised if Lionel Messi, if this is his last tournament. Let's talk about the average number of caps. 31 for Argentina. That doesn't mean much in itself. The average is 34. So surprisingly, despite that age, it doesn't really come with experience because they are a bit below average in terms of experience. So that's quite interesting, except I've realized I'm wrong and I've read the wrong stat. It's 34.1, not 31. 34.1 is bang on average. The average is 34 there. Sorry about that. Okay, Argentina in terms of goals, total goals is 164, and the total goals per cap is 18.5. Now, these numbers don't mean that much in themselves until we compare them with other teams. So 18.5%. And so the total number of goals average is 115. So Argentina way above that. And I don't think you'll be surprised to hear that they are a high scoring team. 18.5, there's few in the world that can match that. It's even higher than Brazil's 16.9. And actually, that is the highest scoring ratio. Yeah, so we can expect goals from Argentina. Well, who can we expect the goals from? We'll take a quick look at that next. And of course, Lionel Messi is good for a few goals. He's got 90 in his career in 164 caps. So that is a ratio of 54.9%, a very good ratio, I would say. And Lautaro Martinez almost matches that with 21 goals in 40 games. So he hasn't been doing it for as long as Messi is. But that's very good ratios for their 2 centre forwards there. And then the other ones chipping in, Angel Di Maria is at 20%. Papu Gomez also at 20%, and Julian Alvarez probably a substitute forward at 18%, but we won't take his statistic too seriously. It's 2 goals in 11 games, so we generally don't take it seriously until they have more than 20 goals. So Papu Gomez also there, only with 15 games. Nevertheless, they're getting goals from all over the field, even a couple of central defenders chipping in with the goals. I'm a bit surprised Nicolas Gonzalez only has 3 in 21 goals, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him scoring a bit more in the cup. But anyway, the goals of Messi and Martinez kind of doing most of the heavy lifting there. And those are the ones we'll be looking for in the cup. Okay, we're going to finish. The next section is a bunch of summaries. So we'll start with notable non-selections. The notable non-selections are Juan Musso. He was a goalie who we considered a likely candidate. Perhaps an injury played into his non-selection there. And I won't do this too much, but there were a couple of players selected for the preliminary squad that were surprising, even though they weren't selected. Agustin Marchesen, coming back from the cold, he had last appeared for the national team in the 2021 Copa America, kind of coming back from the cold to be named to the preliminary squad, but he didn't make the final squad there. Angel Correa almost made the squad. He was the last player cut, but cut he was. Whether he's on the the reserve squad or not. He's basically not on the squad here. And those three players are kind of notable for non-selections. Surprise inclusions? Well, we don't have any, which makes me feel good because it suggests our predictions were pretty good there. However, the next category is new players, and we do have one of those. So Enzo Fernandez is the only new player that actually made the final squad. He's a central midfielder and plays for Benfica in Portugal. And I said I would talk about some of the players who made the preliminary squad but didn't make the final squad, which is kind of interesting because they may well be kind of players to look for in the future or in the next generation. So we just chose a couple of them. Mostly the ones with big club affiliations. So Valentin Carboni, he plays for Inter Milan in Italy, or really with their under-19 squad. Matthias Sule plays for Juventus in Italy. Maybe I'll take the highlights off there so the YouTube viewers can see them a bit more clearly. We also have Alejandro Garnacho, and interestingly, he just made his debut for Man United. So he plays for Manchester United in England. These guys are all really young. Actually, Enzo Fernandez, we saw, was the youngest player on the final squad, just 21 years old. Carboni is 17 years old, Sule 19 years old, and Garnacho 18 years old. And then the other kind of new player, in a sense, is Roberto Pereira. Argentinian fans will be saying, what? He's not new. But he is, in the sense that he's making a comeback. And he was a bit of a surprise selection for the squad. So he's been on the team since 2014 with 19 caps and 2 goals. He's 31 years old. And he played in the 2019 Copa America. But he last appeared for the national team on the bench in October 2019. But surprisingly, for me at least, was named to the preliminary squad. So he plays for Udinese in Italy, and perhaps this suggests a bit of a comeback in the future, although he's 31 years old, so he'd have to probably do it within the next in the next tournament. Okay, updates on injuries. We have 4 categories here. The first one is recovered from injury. So recovered from injury, we have Leandro Paredes, who was a bit of a worry, we mentioned in our last podcast. Paulo Dybala also had a hamstring injury in mid-October, but was back playing in November. Nicolas Gonzalez, and I'm not sure I talked about this one actually. So Nicolas Gonzalez was out with an unknown injury from late October, but he was fit to play on the bench for Argentina's November 16th friendly. And on my main source that I use for injuries, he was not reported as an injured player. So looked like there was a bit of concern, and he made it. Okay, the next category is an injury doubt. So this would be a player who has an injury but is nevertheless on the roster, suggesting that the manager thinks that they will recover from their injury, and that is Christian Romero. A hamstring injury picked up in late October and is expected to return November 19th. So that's a bit that's going to be a bit touchy whether he does, but perhaps he'll miss the first game if the injury is not too serious, and then be able to play for the second. Next category is those dropped due to injury, and this is Juan Musso, or we suspect that that the injury at least played a role in his non-selection, but he was actually back playing in November. But not selected for the squad, but that might explain why the likely candidate was not selected. And also Giovanni Lo Celso missing because of injury. They were kind of waiting until the last moment in hopes that he would make it. But now the prognosis is that he wouldn't recover until December 19th. So that would leave him out of too many games. The last category is players who were injured, but they weren't strong candidates. We don't have anyone in that category. So we're going to move on to the predicted starters section of the podcast. And this is where we finally come clean on what we really think. And YouTube watchers may notice that I magically populated the players, the list there on the podcast. Okay, let's go through the list. So we begin with Lionel Scaloni. So we would consider him as if he was a starter, the starting manager. And for goalkeepers, we have Emiliano Martinez, Franco Armani, and Geronimo Rulli. So in the previous podcast, we had Emilio Martinez as a starter, and we still think so. So no change in our opinion there. For central defenders, we had put all four: Nicolas Otamendi, German Pizzelli, Lisandro Martinez, and Christian Romero. And we had put all four of them as possible or rotating starters, kind of hedging our bets a bit. But honestly, we really couldn't even determine which one had played enough games over the others that we thought that they were favorites. So in the previous podcast, we used yellow to indicate that we weren't sure or that it would be a rotation of these players. And that's what we still think, because the September and November friendlies didn't really clarify things for us. So we have to kind of wait until the Cup to see what's going to happen there. For left backs, the candidates or the successful selections were Marcos Acuna and Nicolas Tagliafico. And in the previous podcast, we predicted Acuna and Tagliafico as rotating starters, and the September and November friendlies reinforced that impression. So we think there's going to be rotation at the left back position there. That could also mean we don't have enough evidence to choose one over the other. For right backs, we have Nahuel Molina, Gonzalo Montiel, and Juan Foyth. The manager really confused us here. We had Molina as the starter, but the friendly since June made us increasingly uncertain. We might still nominate Molina as the starter, given that he had played so many of their games since the 2021 Copa America. But the fact that the manager used all three of them over the last three friendlies makes us a bit doubtful about that. Perhaps there will be a bit of rotation there, but we'll go with Molina on that one. In the central midfield, we're going to combine defensive and central midfielders here. So we had Paredes and Rodriguez as rotating, or both of them possible starters, and we're going to stick to that. Leandro Paredes and so that should be in yellow, because we're not kind of singling out one of them as a starter. And I have a note here: central midfield McAllister looks the most likely. Central midfielder McAllister. Has not started enough games for us to identify him as a starter. But I'm going to change my mind on that. He hasn't started enough necessarily as a central midfielder, but he started as a winger in the last November friendly. He started in a couple of other positions. So I am going to predict that he will be a sometime starter there, though not necessarily as a central midfielder. Okay, let's move on to left midfielders. There were no candidates there. So Lo Celso would have been a I guess a sometimes starter. I'm not buying the managers calling him irreplaceable. I think that was just a euphemism for saying he was a very important player. If he was irreplaceable, he would have started more than 8 of their 13 games. And actually, the fact that Lo Celso is gone kind of boosts McAllister's chances of stepping into this position. Again, I'm kind of glad I've changed McAllister to a sometimes starter there. Okay, as a right midfielder, we had Rodrigo De Paul as a starter, and he usually starts. If it's not a right midfielder formation, then he sometimes starts as a central midfielder. So I'm going to say a definite starter on that one for Rodrigo De Paul. Okay, over on the left wing, we do have Papu Gomez, but we don't see him as a starter. He may get a start, but they don't use the left wing position that much. And the left attacking midfielder or left forward role is sometimes played by a forward. So we didn't see him starting enough to, I wouldn't fight too hard against a possible starter or sometimes starter, but we're going to leave that blank here. Right winger, though, we do have Angel Di Maria as a starter in the upper right quadrant there. The other candidate is Joaquin Correa, but we don't see him as a starter. Okay, for the attacking midfield, the position is rarely used, and we don't have any starters there. And among the forwards, we had Nicolas Gonzalez and Lionel Messi as the starters, but I think I made a mistake there because actually Gonzalez only started 4 games. And so Lautaro Martinez started more. But one of the reasons we had left him out was, or reduced him to likely, was because he had missed one of the games in June. So we wondered if he was being disfavored by the manager. Maybe we were a bit hasty there. Long and short of it, we have Lionel Messi as a starter and Lautaro Martinez as a starter, and Messi not necessarily as a forward, but somewhere in the forward end of the field. Okay, so that is it. Those were our predictions, and we finish with some closing thoughts. Maybe we'll make a comment on how we think Argentina is going to be overall, but we're not going to revisit the whole discussion we had in the team podcast. So we're going to focus on this question. Does the selection change our opinion about Argentina's chances? No. That's really all I have to say about that. We thought that they have a good chance of winning the cup, of winning the title, and there's nothing in these selections that make us change our mind. No major absences. Lo Celso is a bit of a loss there. A couple of players kind of look a bit injured coming in, Romero and maybe even Paredes, but Argentina has more than enough players to cover those losses, and we said they'd be one of the strongest teams in the cup, and we still think so. So that's all we have to say about that, and that brings us to the end of the podcast. Keep in mind, we may be editing together a list of the bios of the 26 final candidates, and those will be mostly outtakes from the main Player podcast. If we do that, it won't be a separate podcast, but just an edited version of the main Player podcast. So if we do that, it'll come out in the first few days of the cup, we hope, and I would personally like to have that to listen to before that team plays a game. Anyway, meanwhile, keep an eye out for us at soccerphiles.canada and visit our website at soccerphilescaptivate.fm. I keep forgetting to show the picture at the end on the YouTube podcast, but there it is. So check our show notes. Everything's in there, links to our website and previous podcasts, and we hope this helps you to enjoy the cup, and we'll see you in our next mediacast. Bye-bye.